We're going to be talking about electrolytes tonight, and I need to build a little bit of a foundation so that we can understand the complexity of this. So we're going to define an electrolyte. An electrolyte is any substance containing a free ion, and I'm going to tell you what an ion is in just a little bit, that makes a substance electrically conductive. Our primary ions are our electrolytes, are sodium, calcium, and we're all pretty familiar with this, potassium, magnesium, and chloride. So we're asking these to provide electrical current that current helps manage or encourages types of functions that go on inside the body. If you notice behind each of the nutrients listed there, sodium has a plus sign, chloride has a negative sign, calcium and magnesium have a number 2 and a plus sign. So we're going to go through that in a little bit too. Electrolytes are simply minerals, and they easily dissolve into a horse's body fluid, the most being the blood. They are vital to a wide range of body functions, and some of those listed here is to manage body fluid levels, nerve impulses, which help with muscle function and pumping in the heart, movement of food and water and through the digestive system, filtering waste through the kidneys and the liver. But tonight we're kind of going to focus on the bottom two, where we're interested in the balance of water and electrolytes, and that process which is essential for cooling our horses, either if the weather is hot or if we're asking them to train or to perform or trailer, any type of stress that is going to increase the horse's work or stress muscle output. We're also going to look at body fluid balance, which is controlled by the electrolytes, and that manages movement of water in and out of the cells. So an ion is either an atom or a molecule. An atom is a single atom. It's a lone. If it's a molecular form, there are 2 or more atoms connected together, so that's the anatomy there. An anion is where there are more electrons than protons, so in other words, more negative charge nutrients than positive charge nutrients, making it or giving it a negative charge. So that's a negative type anion or ion. A cation is an ion with fewer electrons than protons, so less negative charges and more positive charges, therefore giving it a positive charge. So those are kind of the tools that make electrolyte works, and to create that electrical conductivity that helps the cells move nutrients in and out. So I'm going to try just something a little bit different tonight, where you can actually see online how a cell works. And while I'm showing you that, I'm going to go through some of the importances of that sodium-potassium pump. So what is happening on the right-hand side is what I'm going to describe to you here. This is the sodium-potassium pump. The black line is the cell membrane, and it separates the inside of the cell from the outside of the cell. The cell membrane is very selective in what it allows in and out, and moves ions, which is what we're concerned about tonight, organic molecules, and controls, as we discussed, movement of substances in and out of the cell. The cell membrane is far less permeable, in other words, to sodium than to potassium. So potassium moves more freely in and out than sodium. Cellular internal concentration will be high on potassium and low on sodium. The outside of the cell will be high concentration of sodium and low concentration of potassium ions. Potassium ions keep escaping out of the cells, and sodium ions keep entering in the cell. So you can kind of see this going on. And this happens actually with a force or a pumping action. The cells will force or pump the sodium out and take in potassium against a concentration gradient. And really what that means is that we want more potassium on the inside, more sodium on the outside, and as you can see, an important function is that the cells are pumping out 3 sodium ions from the cells for every 2 potassium ions. So that creates an imbalance. But it is that process of a net loss of 3 to 2 that helps move water out of the cell. So we're looking at this as helping our horses maintain hydration, which is what electrolytes are all about. Another important responsibility of this pump is creating an electrical charge across that cellular membrane. So the continual loss of 1 positive ion in each revolution of the pump maintains a positive on the outside of the cell and a negative charge on the inside. It is that exchange that hydrates and maintains our blood pH. pH we've talked about a little bit in some of the other webinars. Acid is anything below 7 on the pH scale, and base is anything more positive and above 7 on the pH scale. The horse's body, the saliva and the urine and the blood really want to function at a normal or a nutrient range of 7. So our cellular structures and the nutrients thereof will manage that acid-base ratio so that cells can function in the proper environment so that we can have our cells do their jobs like this particular cell is doing here. The proper balance of water and electrolytes is essential for cooling our horse, which is done by sweat. And we'll get into that a little bit further. So you can see the exchange here of 2 potassium coming in and more potassium as the end result being inside, and more sodium as 3 of them are transported there to the exterior of the cell. So I'm going to go ahead and minimize this. Let me get to my next screen, so bear with me. But I thought it would just be a lot easier for you to understand if you could see that cell function happening at the same time as I was describing the purpose and the functions of that cell. Now here are 4 of our electrolytes: magnesium, sodium, calcium, and potassium. And each one of these do have an atomic mass. If you can kind of dredge up in the back of your mind way back in school that periodic table of elements. And so just so that you see how intricate the body is, when you put potassium and magnesium and they work together, they come to a total of atomic weight of 63. When you put sodium and calcium together, their atomic mass is equivalent also to 63. So does the body know what it's doing or what? So we're going to talk about the role of water. A horse's body is 65 to 67% water, or actually 2/3 water. A 1,000-pound horse, 660 pounds of that body mass is water. 80 gallons is what that is equivalent to. We expect a horse to drink at least 10 gallons of water a day, 1/3 of that fluid is outside the cells, so it's outside the cellular structure. 2/3 of that fluid is withheld inside the cells. Water washes through the organs, bringing nutrients into the cells and moisture to the tissues. Flushes out waste and toxins. And what happens when we run short on water? Dehydration, which is another term that is widely used when we're talking about electrolytes, because that's what we're trying to prevent from happening. And yes, the water quality that you provide your horse does matter, and we're going to get into that as well. So looking at the chart on the side, the top portion in yellow is extracellular, so the fluid outside the cells in your horse's body is 20% of your horse's body weight. Those fluids contain joint fluid. Plasma is fluid, blood plasma, so that's in the blood. Fluid in the stomach, intestines, even that surrounding the brain, and the lymph fluid is part of our immune system. The purple part here says intracellular fluid. That's fluid inside our cells. Inside our cells makes up 40% of the horse's body weight. The green is solid body mass. The other 40% of our horse's body is comprised of bone and tissue matter. So we're going to talk about one of our first electrolytes here, which is chloride. And chloride is chemically defined as 2 chlorine ions, so that would be a molecule if you're looking at it. But the body uses chlorine and is required as a chloride. So no, we're not saying here that chlorinated water is a plus. That's not what I'm saying here, so remove that from your mind. We'll describe how that plays an impact in electrolyte here shortly. The chloride is used to create stomach acid and hydrogen chloride, but right now I just want you to focus on that stomach acid. Chloride helps maintain the balance of acid and pH in the body. But here's where it really helps us as far as hydration and getting nutrients, those ions, into the horse's body. So sodium and potassium, both are substances that cannot be taken in orally in their metallic form. It's very volatile and corrosive. So we attach chloride to each one of these, and that's how we get potassium and sodium into the horse's body as a supplement. So we have potassium chloride and sodium chloride, which we all know as being salt. Excess potassium chloride is actually less toxic than sodium chloride. So giving a bunch of salt is more corrosive in many ways to your horse. Excess salt, again sodium chloride, in the diet will cause water retention. So sometimes if you think a horse is overweight, it may not necessarily be fat. It can be water weight. And a lot of times if we put a horse on the correct electrolytes and support digestion, that water weight will actually drop. And the horse will be more finely tuned, and you can see the molecular or the muscle structure and things of that nature. Excess salt can create stress, internal stress, and believe it or not, here we are, dehydration. So too much salt can actually create dehydration. Up at the top, we're going to talk about sodium and potassium by themselves. On the left-hand side, that is the anatomy of a sodium molecule, or actually a sodium atom. And potassium, there you have the anatomy of that. Cells and organs require the right balance of water inside the cells and water outside the cells in order to function properly. Sodium chloride separates into a sodium ion, and when that happens is when a horse actually consumes salt or sodium chloride, the chloride gets separated off and used as stomach acid. So then we have a free ion, which is what an electrolyte is. And in this particular case, we have a free sodium ion. And when that works with a potassium, that maintains optimal amount of water in the body. Sodium also maintains the level of the water in our blood that flows outside the cells and tissues, plus regulates the total amount of water in the body that is supposed to be in the body. Potassium maintains water level within the cells and regulates heartbeat and muscle functions. So you can see that sodium regulates water outside the cells, potassium regulates water inside the cells. An imbalance of either sodium or potassium will obviously upset that water balance and impair numerous cellular activities that depend upon water. So, oh, my screen quit working here, so I'm going to come back into it. All right, well, I guess we'll just leave those on the bottom for right now. So what happens with dehydration or excessive sweat loss? You can have what's termed heat stroke, and that's where a horse doesn't sweat enough and is thus unable to cool itself. We can also have a horse that is already diagnosed as anhydrosis, and that's where their electrolyte and mineral contents are imbalanced and their sweating mechanism has already been shut off. The body has shut that off, or it's not given the nutrients or the tools to operate correctly. So body heat will build up. Dangerous levels of body temperatures will run 106 to 110 degrees after exercise. This is a very serious issue. If you're at a ride or event, you need to get a veterinarian involved. But this website, www.discoverhorses.com, and there which you will have access to how to manage heat stroke for your horse. And what I would do is print that out and keep that in my first aid kit in the trailer and keep that in the barn. Maybe if you have a large barn, you might want to get your horse owners and people together, and at the beginning of a summer just quickly go through some of the symptoms of heat stroke and what are the steps to do when that happens. When we have dehydration or excessive sweat loss, it will disrupt circulation because water gets pulled out of the blood. Water gets pulled out of digestion, so we can't have food move through and have that digestive system work properly. The digestive system without water will also get acidic. We will have damage of organs because we're going to have destruction of the cells itself that make up those organs, and of course we're going to lose smooth muscle function. So some of the things that you will hear maybe after an endurance ride, which is where where my history is from, is if we have a horse that ties up. And another term for that is the azoturia, which is what I'm familiar with. You will see dark red brown urine. This is caused by electrolyte imbalances, especially low sodium. Not necessarily low sodium chloride, not low salt, but low sodium. And a precursor is possible deficiencies of vitamin E and selenium, which is very important for muscle function as well. So in England, there were some studies done, and with their data suggests that there is, when this occurs in our horse, we have a tying up situation, that sodium, calcium, and phosphorus are contributing to the problem. So we have an imbalance of sodium, and we will have also an imbalance in the calcium-phosphorus ratio. So this would be, for this particular type of horse, if I were going to kind of address the diet, I would put the horse on the ABCs Plus. Of course, the vitamin E and selenium supplement, specifically we're going to find this in a horse that's in a selenium deficient area. And we will do a product of ours called ions. which we will discuss later. But obviously I'm going to incorporate free choice Rush Creek mineral here to help balance those macro minerals, calcium and phosphorus. And we're going to make sure that the horse has access to a white salt at home. We're not going to force feed sodium chloride. There, in the ions, there is available sodium sources, but they're not tied to chloride, so it's easier on the digestive system and will manage that sodium balance much better than sodium chloride would. We have thumps is another lay term. The body in a horse, you will see mild rhythmic spasms or muscle spasms, generally on the side or the rib cage of the horse. You may also see stiffness and depression, again caused by electrolyte imbalance and significant fluid loss. Here we're looking at low calcium blood levels, commonly at fault, but it's always good to check the other electrolyte levels, looking specifically also at magnesium, potassium, sodium, and chlorine. Acid-base imbalances can occur. The nutrients there that kind of manage that acid-base ratio is chloride, sodium, potassium, and calcium. And then another thing we've heard of is heaves after a workout or a competition. Calcium losses are high in sweat, and particularly in long-distance competition is where you will see this condition of heaves. And calcium is essential for maintaining controlled skeletal and heart muscle contractions. With dehydration and excessive sweat loss, you will see premature fatigue, reduced stamina, muscle cramps, and poor post-exercise recovery. So, electrolyte loss, where does that sweat come from? Initially, when a horse sweats, water in sweat is coming from the blood. So if we have lost a large amount of sweat, it's going to decrease our blood volume. The body does that, and when that happens, it is really supposed to trigger a drink response in our horse to rebuild back up the hydration or the water in the blood. So that's one way a horse's body is asking itself to rehydrate. When we lose that water in the blood flow cannot flow to muscles for work. Dehydration results, and that's when the body temperature increases because we are expecting sweat to work as our cooling device. So sweat is actually our air conditioner. Horses are slow to replace fluid, and that is due to the content of their sweat. Horses' sweat is higher in all of the electrolytes in concentration. It's losing those 5 that we talked about earlier. So horses actually lose 3 times more sodium and 10 times more potassium in their sweat than we do. So when we get dehydrated, that sodium concentration that is outside the cells is supposed to become salty per se. And when that happens, this is another way that a horse is supposed to get the urge to take a drink. This process is slower to develop in a horse because not only do they lose sodium, but they lose a balance of all those other electrolytes, so that response to drink is slow for some horses, or sometimes if they're competing, it just may shut off altogether. When we sweat, we lose mostly water. The water loss is what leaves us with an imbalance and triggers our drink response. In our horses, we need to also consider that they will lose fluids in urine and in their manure. When we're considering what type of electrolytes we need to bring with us, or if we need to electrolyte daily, we have to consider climate conditions. Whether it's hot or cold is very simple, but if it's really hot and moist out, that's going to make a huge impact on how that horse is going to be able to cool itself, because we're expecting that sweat to evaporate. If there's already a lot of humid or water in the air, that's going to slow that evaporation and cooling process. And dehydration happens even if you don't see sweat on your horse. Why? Because it may be evaporating as quickly as it forms for the body's cooling process. Another thing that you need to take into consideration, this is a table that expresses to us, or is showing us, exhaled water loss from the lungs. So on the left there, for a horse that is in rest, you can see minimal amounts of water loss in their exhalation, or whenever they exhale. We increase the workload on that horse to trotting. You can see that yellow column, just how much water is lost with each exhalation from the lung. So David Frappe is one that did the study on this, and says an increase in body temperature during exercise increases moisture content of exhaled air by 15%. You put this together with our increased respiration volume, which when we're in work, we're breathing heavier. This increases the expiratory water out of our lungs, exhaled out of our lungs, by 8 times. So not are we losing water via sweat, we're losing water that we can't even see with each exhalation. This table here, we have an endurance horse that ran a 54-mile race. We have a hunter that fox hunted for 3 hours. We have a thoroughbred that did some training prior to a race, and a standardbred who ran a 1-mile race. So that hunter who worked 3 hours chasing fox lost up to, and even more or less, depending upon the horse, of course, almost lost 100 pounds of body weight in water. In endurance racing, which is where my history is, you see a lot of water loss in weight as well, and it can range up to 80 and well above that. Our lower performance horses, they get lose water as well. So that is, of course, water loss depends upon workload, stress level. We have these same 4 horses. We're looking at this table, and it's telling us the content of sweat. So how much sodium, potassium, and chloride did each one of these horses lose just in their sweat? You can see that the chloride in our high-performance horses is high as far as loss. Sodium's next, and potassium falls in after that. Another test that was run was, what kind of diet do we feed our horse to have the diet work for us in order to maintain hydration levels in our horse? And there was a diet of 2.1 kilograms of hay, 2.5 kilograms of grain. That's in the green. I'm mainly interested in the water intake here. And you can see that the water intake in green was a little low, especially when you look at a diet that is 6.1 kilograms hay to 1 kilogram of grain. Wow, do you see that that water intake level increased tremendously? So if we can have more hay in a horse's diet than grain, we have more water coming into the horse's diet. We are going to be more prepared for sweat loss prior to a competition or traveling. So when it comes to reducing the chances of dehydration, we really need to take in all those possibilities to maintain or get the horse well hydrated before we put it into a situation where we're going to lose a lot of water. As we just saw, sodium and chloride are the two major electrolytes lost in a horse's sweat. But does that mean that we need to add a bunch of salt to the diet? No. Normal salt does not replace the other essential electrolytes. So yes, sodium chloride needs to be a part of a good electrolyte, one that you want to trigger a drink response. But salt will also kind of create an acidosis or a more acid. So it disrupts that acid-base balance that we're looking for. While common salt definitely is essential to the horse, the high-performance horse needs that complex and comprehensive electrolyte to sustain peak performance. Not only do they lose electrolytes, but B vitamin loss is also high, vitamin C, some of those other nutrients that I just couldn't address here. But if we have a horse that is in work, we will incorporate our free choice stress system into that horse's diet. So not only will Rush Crate be there to assist with macro nutrients like calcium and phosphorus, which we've seen is already important to managing electrolytes, and other vitamins and other trace minerals, but we also have a product that's incorporated into that stress system that's called BVC, and that's our B complex vitamin. Electrolyte losses cannot be corrected or prevented unless the horse receives support in a daily feed ration. And what you need to decide is each horse is different. We have a good drinker, they can manage their hydration levels, and the only time they get dehydrated is when we trailer them. Then really you need to just add a soft electrolyte or maybe a little harsher electrolyte to actually trigger a drink response the night before you trailer. So this information I'm giving you will help you decide what kind of horse you have. How does he or does that horse manage its body in keeping hydrated? Horses are also reluctant to drink, especially when already partially hydrated. So the goal is to stay ahead of that before it actually happens. Water quality, again, will impact anything that we have discussed in our webinar up to this point. Horses consume almost four times more water than food every single day, and that includes hay. So our water quality will affect electrolyte balance. You never want to add electrolyte to a horse's water, not electrolytes, but really anything else, because it just may turn them off from drinking it. So as a precautionary, keep water consistent. Always have non-iodized, non-mineralized white salt, free access. And even if you're traveling, when I traveled, I took a little baggie of white salt with me, and I made sure that they had a little feeder of it while I was on the road. I maybe even kept a little bit in the hay section there while they were traveling. That kind of helps with triggering that drink response, but I have also preloaded them with a lot of Probi because that sodium can disturb digestion. Horses do not store sodium or potassium or chloride from one day to the next, so therefore a high level of a daily light feeding electrolytes is only necessary if we have high sweat loss, or we have a poor drinker, or our water quality is inadequate. Significant sweat loss cannot only be replaced with water. It may help you feel a little bit. You come into a vet check, or you're stopping midway in through your trail ride. Your horse takes a big drink of water. Fantastic. I mean, that you can take a big sigh of relief. However, if you're going to continue and you're already seeing some dehydrated symptoms, it would be a good time to administer an electrolyte at this time, so because you do not want to get into a loss. But high levels of water will only dilute the electrolyte pool. So at that time, as I said, you may need to administer orally, or if you're stopping to eat, a few electrolytes into the diet so that their dehydration doesn't get any worse. You want to dose electrolytes the night before transportation is always good. Encourages the horse to drink during and after the trip. Again, something that can help you keep your horse hydrated before a competition, staying ahead of the game. If a horse isn't drinking well, supplemental electrolytes will help trigger a drink response. Consider giving electrolytes a half an hour before the start of an event and at intervals during competition. Now, at this particular time, you're going to be using an electrolyte that does contain sodium chloride. And I'm going to mention this again later, but when you're dosing at this particular time, you don't want the gut to shut down. So you're going to be mixing your electrolytes with what we have is called Probi. Another one is KLPP. So you can take and mix that with the Probi, administer that orally. That way the harshness or the sodium chloride of that electrolyte is not shutting down the gut, creating an acid environment. Because if you're a long distance trail ride, you want to make sure that they eat along the way too. And endurance horses or other high performance horses, you want to make sure that they're eating, because some of those events may last for hours. So some of their calories we're going to get from food and hay and some of those other things. We want to make sure that that digestive system is functioning properly. Not only that, but if they have an upset stomach, they're just not going to perform well. The goal is to prevent dehydration, maintaining fluid balance, and prompting thirst when you get to a point of getting into an event. You want to stay ahead of that game. But while you're dosing electrolytes, the horse must still get fluids. So you need to make sure that there are plenty of opportunities for that horse to get a drink. Using electrolytes without proper water consumption will cause water to be absorbed from the bloodstream and into the intestine. This will result in greater dehydration. I apologize for that. So water consumption along with an electrolyte balanced supplement is really what we're going for here. Check for signs of dehydration regularly. Do not wait until your horse looks dehydrated. So it's very important and extremely helpful if you learn some of these simple tests. So skin pinch test, capillary and jugular refill, mucous membrane testing, and of course taking that stethoscope and listening for gut sounds in all four of those quadrants. Ask your veterinarian if you don't know how to do some of these. So if you have your veterinarian out for a visit, say, hey, I'd like to learn how to do these few things. Can you show me really quick? Other signs to look for: sunken in eyes, so that area above their eyes will begin to sink in. Fatigue, increased heart and respiration. When we raced endurance, we kept pretty close tabs on heart rate and respiration rate. And so we carried second-hand watches, or we used heart monitors. Again, we want to catch things before we get behind the 8-ball, because horses are so sensitive. Once you're behind the 8-ball, it's really hard to catch up, and so many bad things can happen. Another thing is a weak pulse. Sometimes you can feel that in the digital down by the feet or the ankle area. You can continue electrolyte supplementation when the event is over. And there's been studies at Washington University that the horse's hormones are still seeking sodium than even the day after the event. So here we're about post-recovery. replacing those electrolytes, managing the body fluid levels, and getting our nutrients back into balance again so that the horse can repair from the stress, from the exercise, from sweat loss. Small amounts of electrolytes can generally be safely given before they reach a critical point. Now, if we knew that if there was an exact science to this, I probably would have had a really very short webinar, but there is not a exact science here. So it makes it a little bit more difficult to keep our horses electrolyted. So you kind of, in your training, in various conditions and on different types of courses, you want to try and estimate how much loss your horses has incurred. And it seems like a baseline here is to supplement an electrolyte that replaces somewhere between a third and to a half of that total loss. So if you kind of need help with that, give us a call. If it's at all possible, keep track of how much water your horse is actually consuming. Like water, electrolytes can be retained in and then absorbed from the large intestine. So adding some electrolytes to the diet, to a high fiber diet, which is where the large intestine is breaking down fiber prior to event, is going to be helpful in maintaining hydration. Give us a little kick maybe later on into the event. Now, after the event is over, you still need to be monitoring your horses carefully as far as fatigue, recovery, and it just may be wise to wait to take that trailer ride back home or to the next event. The worst thing that we want to do is transport a dehydrated horse on a trailer ride, where in transportation it is also a very dehydrating experience. So wait a few hours, wait till the next day, give your horse some time to rehydrate, administer some electrolytes in that time frame. So to kind of give you an idea, a 10-hour trailer ride is equivalent to your horse walking continuously for 10 hours, and that is without even tack or a rider. Learn your horse, adjust to your horse's specific needs and weather conditions. You'll hear me tell you this a lot. I'm a big fan of journaling and charting, and once I find something that works, I don't change. So, and it may be a different regimen for each horse, unfortunately, but it's that training and that note-taking and supplementation during training that's going to help you compete and keep your horse healthy to compete and finish safely, and of course to increase his performance level. When preparing an event, choose an electrolyte formula that is obviously palatable and acceptable to your horse. The worst thing you want to do is wait until the day of the competition to find out. And I know that there's been times where you arrive to the event and either you forgot your electrolyte or something of that nature. Just keep your trailer inventory always fresh. I don't know if many people have seen this picture, but have we all been here? I have, and some horses are worse than others in this, but the goal is to stay ahead and keep your horse hydrated before they become seriously depleted. So we're going to talk a little bit now about sodium saturation. I hope you're still with me. And where salt is not the answer as an electrolyte, sodium saturation, and I just want to let you know we're just about done, sodium saturation is commonly the cause of a potassium shortage. So where would this happen, or how does this happen? When sodium content in your water is high. Actually, believe it or not, there are some areas of the country where sodium levels are high in water. Consumption of high sodium feeds. There are a lot of complete feeds out there, supplements that contain too much salt. Taste some of it, just a couple of pellets of your feed, and see how salty it is. It's amazing what people find out when they taste a little bit of their horse's supplements. Water softening systems. So if your water that's going out to the barn is running through a water softening system and you're using sodium chloride, you're going to have sodium saturation problems. And I usually tell people, no, I always tell people to shut that off for drinking water. If potassium is not concentrated enough on the inside of the cell, the sodium-potassium pump is going to have to work harder to keep out that sodium. And when that happens, you can get dehydration. So here again we have an imbalance of sodium and potassium. And where can it go? It can lead us down this dehydration road. Another thing, when we're looking at our hay, soil fertilizers often contain high levels of salts and chlorides. So generally our plant sources, like hay, is lacking in potassium. That will imbalance the sodium and potassium pump. So what happens when an animal gets sodium saturated? One, they're going to have a lot of water weight, so kind of start looking for that. High concentrations of the sodium will become, the cells will actually become waterlogged to the point of bursting. That cell membrane will break open. And when cells die to this imbalance, sodium slowly seeps into the inside the cell where we want the potassium to be, and then potassium starts to diffuse out. That disrupts the whole pumping of sodium and potassium. Then not only that, we lose our electrical polarization of the cell, because it's that cell membrane that function as a battery to provide power to operate a lot of molecular jobs and functions. And just to give you an idea, inside there is a negative voltage inside a neuron. Will run somewhere between -70 to -80 millivolts. It's just very interesting. So that's where we're going to have that electrical polarization of the cell of that membrane diminished to zero, and then really there is no cellular structure left. The flow of the particles and waste in and out ceases. So avoid top-dressing salt to the diet, and look at your label ingredients. Where is salt listed on your list of ingredients? You don't really want it really high up there. Then we are led to believe that any water will increase hydration for cells within minutes. There's that thinking that if a horse takes a good drink of water, that horse is now hydrated. This incorrectly paints a picture that water is water just because it's wet, and that's not true. So, and we kind of just described some of these things. So here we have our products. Ions is our safe daily electrolyte. So it is not going to contain salt. It does not also contain chloride. Because so it's going to help if you are on chlorinated water. If you have chlorinated water running through your barn, add a simple activated charcoal filter. They're inexpensive. You can buy them locally off the internet. Add them into the water line, off your hydrant, at the end of your hose. They make some of those. And of course, if you set your water out in the sun, that will dissipate the chlorine as well. But I like charcoal filters because they actually do make the water taste better. Ions will provide nutrients if if your water is per se what we call dead water. And that means there's no ions. Ions are what provide our electrical charge to stimulate cellular functions. And so actually we can look at the ion content of your water and see if there's any ionic potential there. And if there isn't, where it's just plain dead water, we add ions. At the cellular level, the ions will help perform those movement of nutrients with that electrical positive and negative charges. What about hard water? If we have hard water, the cell membrane is not flexible. So cells will have difficulty moving nutrients in and waste out. And the best way I can describe this to you is if you take 2 glasses of water, one glass will contain hard water, the other glass will have just natural water, not been softened, but natural balanced water. You put a piece of thread on both, and we're going to just call our piece of thread calcium. We're going to lay it on the surface gently on each glass, and that thread of calcium may sit on that hard water all day long. It may never sink down to the bottom. So does that tell you if your horse has hard water, it's going to have a hard time assimilating not alone calcium but some other things, right? And then the movement of water in and out of cells is going to be difficult. So hard water is difficult, but we're not going to, it can be managed without a water softener. Now the thread of calcium that is on that soft water, by now, since I've talked about this hard water thing over here, has already gently floated to the bottom. That type of water is where nutrients will be assimilated easily at the cellular level and will not disrupt that cellular membrane. So it's just where our goal is, and if you do have high content of hard water, the ions can help you. The ions will provide electrolytes to balance high sodium water and or high sodium diets. I mentioned earlier to always have non-iodized, non-mineralized white salt for free access to your horse. You may also have Redmond salt out. You may have Himalayan salt licks. You may put out sea salt. You can have as many salts out as you'd like if your horse has interest, but you must have a white salt out there. And the ions is because it doesn't contain that sodium chloride. Since we're just kind of at home, the horse has access to sodium chloride through a salt block or a loose white salt. It can manage its own sodium chloride levels, but it's these other imbalances that we're trying to take care of, and we're trying to help keep your horse hydrated just on a daily basis. So because it doesn't have that sodium chloride in it, it will not disturb digestion or cause ulcers in the stomach or in the esophagus. Ions is highly, highly available chelated minerals. Now Ride Rite is our other electrolyte. It has sodium chloride. It is used to trigger a drink response to assist the horse to consume water. It is also formulated with the other complex electrolytes that a horse loses in its sweat and a balanced ratio. As I mentioned early, this particular electrolyte, just like any other electrolyte that would be high in sodium chloride or salt, administer it, make a nice soupy consistency of it, or maybe a little bit thicker like a paste that will go through a syringe with Provi or Cal-PDP and administer that via a syringe. You may begin dosing 1 to 2 days prior to transportation and or competitions or trail rides. I found that to be very successful for me. That was dependent upon the horse. I have horses that they're very receptive to drinking competitive, even when we're competing, I have had other horses that just completely shut down. They were only interested in the horse in front of them, the horse in back of them, where were they in the race, the other horses at the vet check. So that particular horse, you're going to have to take full responsibility on keeping it hydrated. Then we have Winter Electrolyte and with Chlorophyll. This is used in, it's a soft daily electrolyte. It's used in the wintertime when we no longer have that pasture time. Also, when it's colder, horses have a tendency to become dehydrated because they don't want to drink that water, that cold water. It also contains chlorophyll enzymes and vitamin E, which horses will get that off your pasture. So I'm at the end finally, and I hope that it wasn't too long and complicated for you. I enjoyed these pictures. Officer on the left in obviously a city where they patrol using horses. Down here on the lower right hand side is either somebody in a long trail ride or endurance riding and partaking of a water source there on the trail. So thank you very much for joining us tonight. If there's any questions, please feel free to contact us.